Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a truly um, foundational piece of literature today, one that really gets into the deepest parts of the human condition, spirituality, and the complex tapestry of our internal lives. The source material you've shared offers an incredible window into the early life and formative experiences of a central figure, Father Zosima.
It's a fascinating exploration, really. The text doesn't just tell us who Father Zosima became, it meticulously lays out the specific moments and encounters that sculpted his worldview, his understanding of suffering, joy, and his eventual spiritual path. It's kind of like looking at the bedrock layers that support a mountain, you see.
Exactly. Our mission in this deep dive is to go beyond just summarizing the plot. We want to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from this incredibly rich narrative. We're aiming to understand the internal journeys of these characters and the powerful, sometimes challenging ideas they embody, offering you, hopefully, a shortcut to grappling with some truly profound concepts presented in this story.
And the sources you provided are quite specific in detailing this foundational period. We begin with his very early life, starting with the impactful death of his elder brother. This brother figure seems to have prefigured some of Zosima's later spiritual insights.
Interesting.
Then we follow Zosima into his own transformative youthful experiences, particularly a dramatic turning point during his time in the military. This all culminates in a significant and rather mysterious encounter with a man haunted by a terrible, long-held secret.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. These aren't just biographical details or isolated events. They are powerful vehicles the source material uses to explore fundamental human questions that resonate just as strongly today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We're talking about questions concerning the nature and weight of guilt, the nuances of personal responsibility, the agonizing possibility or maybe impossibility of forgiveness, the struggle between beliefs and doubt, and that core human tension between feeling utterly isolated and recognizing a profound universal connection to others.
Okay, let's dive in and see how these experiences, these deep currents beneath the surface, forged the man who became the revered spiritual elder, Father Zosima. So we begin our journey, as the source does, with Father Zosima himself reflecting back on his elder brother. This brother, we learn, died quite young, only 17 years old.
Yeah, 7-2. And he's a figure whose appearance is mentioned as being reflected later in the character of Alyosha.
Ah, right.
Which helps to explain Zosima's deep affection for him in the main narrative. It establishes this profound, almost ancestral connection right away.
And what was this brother like initially, in his early years?
Well, the text describes him as quiet, introverted, someone who generally kept very much to himself. He wasn't outwardly expressive or particularly social, maybe internally focused even then, though not quite in the way he would become later.
So, a reserved kid. But
Yeah.
then, there's a key turning point described in the source material that disrupts this quiet existence. This brother came into contact with an unconventional lecturer who arrived in their town.
Right, and this lecturer sounds like a truly transformative, maybe even disruptive force. He was known for saying things that struck people as decidedly strange, definitely outside the accepted norms of thought and belief at the time. His ideology didn't sit right with what was considered conventional or normal, particularly regarding matters of faith and reason.
So, a bit of a radical thinker for the time.
You could say that. In fact, the source notes he was eventually kicked out of the university,
Wow.
which tells you he was operating significantly outside the academic or societal mainstream.
And this is where the intense connection forms between the brother and the lecturer. The source says the brother was intensely impacted by him, spent day and night with him discussing things.
Precisely. This wasn't just a fleeting influence. It was a deep, almost obsessive immersion in this new way of thinking, this challenge to establish norms. And the impact, at least initially, was profound and quite startling, particularly in the realm of his faith.
Right. The most immediate and striking impact of the lecturer's influence was that when the brother returned home after spending time with him, he declared that he no longer believed in God.
Yeah, a huge shock. A dramatic rejection of the family's religious background, particularly distressing for his deeply pious mother, you can imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
His new perspective was one of intense criticism, applying a relentless, almost cold logic to everything. His core argument, maybe echoing the lecturer, became, if you couldn't see tangible, empirical evidence of God, why should he believe?
Pure rationalism.
Exactly. This starkly rational, almost materialistic approach to belief was clearly a direct result of the professor's impact, prioritizing intellectual proof above all else. He was operating purely in the realm of reason and argument, which, the source notes, he actually excelled at.
So he was good at debating this stuff, using logic.
Very good. But then a dramatic and unexpected shift occurs within just a couple of years. Around the time he's only 14 or 15, he becomes very ill, very
I mean,
quickly.
it was a serious illness for that era,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Tragically so. He was stricken with consumption, tuberculosis, TB.
Oh, wow.
At the time this story is set, a couple of centuries ago, TB was rampant, highly dangerous, and often fatal. There was absolutely no known cure.
So this forces him to confront something beyond logic.
Completely, this sudden severe illness forces him to confront something his logic and intellectual arguments couldn't account for, predict, or control. The stark uncertainty of life, the fragility of the body, and his own utter lack of control over his fate. His carefully constructed world of pure reason is suddenly faced with an undeniable reality that defies his intellectual framework.
And this confrontation with mortality, this sudden vulnerability, leads to a pivotal moment, described as happening while he's sick in bed, looking out the window.
This is really the heart of his transformation, the awakening moment. From his sick bed, weakened but maybe with senses heightened, he sees the garden outside, the vibrant, blooming flowers, the sturdy, beautiful trees, the distant mountains bathed in light. Sunlight streams into his room. And in that moment, seeing the sheer, undeniable beauty and vitality of nature, something shifts fundamentally within him. He feels with an overwhelming certainty that this beauty is evidence, perhaps the only necessary evidence of God.
Not logic, but the beauty itself.
Exactly. He wonders how such exquisite complexity, such effortless beauty, could possibly exist otherwise, if not from a divine source. It's described as a sudden, intense realization, not intellectual, but something that grips his entire being.
Which stands in such stark contrast to his earlier reliance on pure logic. He seems to grasp something new about knowledge itself.
Absolutely. He understands that this realization, this profound feeling of the divine presence in nature, goes far beyond mere logic or intellectual argument. He now sees logic as only a small, maybe even limited, part of how we apprehend reality.
Useful, but limited.
Right. Useful for breaking things down, for argument and debate, which he's good at. But ultimately, he feels it falls short when it comes to grasping the full scope of existence. Experience, this sudden, visceral connection to the beauty and wonder of the world, goes deep within one's whole being. It's an internal knowing, a felt sense of truth, that logic simply cannot touch.
That makes sense.
And he looks back on his previous 15 or 16 years spent prioritizing intellectual debate and rational proof, and he laments missing this ever-present evidence, the sun rising, the mountains standing firm, the flowers blooming, which was always there right in front of him.
Wow. It's that idea that the value of life is often understood most keenly when it's about to end.
Precisely. When the usual distractions and intellectual barriers fall away, and despite the gravity of his illness, despite the doctor saying he wouldn't live long, he doesn't seem sad or fearful when family and neighbors visit.
That's remarkable.
It is, isn't it? He doesn't exhibit the fear you might expect from a dying young man. He tells them not to be troubled on his behalf, saying, with this serene confidence, I'm not going anywhere.
As if he knows something.
It seems he truly grasped something fundamental about the true essence of things, the soul, consciousness, God seeing. The idea that awareness, that inner light, lives on, that the soul is immortal and not confined to the fragile body.
He found peace.
A peace that surpasses understanding, yes. And from this new perspective, he saw life, even in its final moments, as fundamentally beautiful and miraculous in the present moment. He even gently criticized people for being troubled by what he now saw as utterly trivial matters, fighting amongst themselves, crying over nothing, when the world itself and its quiet beauty was a continuous miracle.
And this newfound peace leads to the most crucial teaching he imparts, the one that leaves the deepest mark on his younger brother, Zosima. He calls young Zosima, who's only 8 or 9 at the time, to his bedside.
This is a very tender, intimate, and ultimately foundational moment for Zosima. The older brother, on his deathbed, puts his hand on young Zosima's head, a gesture of blessing, almost, and imparts this vital lesson. Life is beautiful, he repeats, reinforcing his realization. And because of this beauty, you must try to live with love for everyone and give love to everyone.
Universal love.
Yes. He says that love, this outpouring connection to others, is the one thing that truly sustains us and brings us closest to God. It's a call to radical, universal love. But then he adds another striking, and for an 8-year-old, surely perplexing idea. Every person, he declares, is responsible for the sins of everyone else.
Whoa, that's heavy.
Extremely. and he includes himself in this sweeping statement, declaring quite startlingly that he is responsible for all the wrongdoings, all the evil in the world.
How could an 8-year-old even process that? I am responsible for the sins of others.
Impossible, right? Young Sosima at that age couldn't possibly grasp the intellectual or theological depth of this philosophy. But the source emphasizes that he was profoundly impacted, not by the words themselves, but by his brother's manner, the intensity of his conviction, and the shining, almost otherworldly light in his eyes as he spoke.
So the energy got through.
Exactly. The message resonated on a level deeper than intellectual understanding. Zosima actually repeats this strange idea to his mother, maybe trying to make sense of it.
And what does she say?
Well, she, quite reasonably from a conventional perspective, questions how he could possibly be responsible for the acts of criminals and murderers, especially since he himself, a child, hasn't committed any significant sins.
The logical question.
The very logical question. And his response goes right to the heart of the difference between intellectual knowledge and lived experience. He explains that she can't understand this idea of universal responsibility because she only knows God and perhaps truth itself through words and books, through doctrine and intellectual constructs, not through lived internal experience.
Experience versus book learning.
Precisely. He's contrasting his sudden, total awakening, his profound internal experience of interconnectedness, with merely knowing about something secondhand. He uses that powerful analogy, knowing intellectually about gravity on the moon is fundamentally different from Neil Armstrong experiencing it firsthand, feeling that difference with his entire body and being.
That's a great analogy.
Isn't it? He suggests his mother's questioning, her inability to grasp universal responsibility, comes from her fundamental perception of herself as separate from others, as an isolated individual unit.
Seeing herself as separate, not connected.
Exactly. He connects this radical idea of universal responsibility to a spiritual perspective implied by his awakening. That in terms of pure energy, pure consciousness, perhaps the underlying fabric of existence, we are all interconnected. The universe, in a sense, experiences and understands itself through each of us.
Deep stuff.
Very deep. While materially we are distinct individuals, a criminal and a good person are vastly different on a physical, social, moral level, on a deeper spiritual plane. It's about pure energy, pure consciousness, where distinctions blur and interconnectedness is the fundamental reality.
And the mother struggles with this.
Understandably. She's grounded in a more conventional, individualistic understanding of sin and salvation.
So despite this conversation and other talk that some people might dismiss as strange, maybe caused by the illness.
Yes. The source mentions some did think he was speaking strangely due to his illness, perhaps in a fevered state, but his time passes and he dies.
And the description of his death.
It's crucial. It's peaceful. His face, even after death, is described as calm and pure, entirely unlike the fearful expressions often seen in a normal death. This reinforces the sense that he had achieved some kind of profound internal peace.
Wow.
A reconciliation with life and death, and a deep understanding before he passed away.
And this first intimate encounter with death for young Zosima, combined with his brother's powerful teachings, especially that idea of universal responsibility and deep interconnectedness, universal love, universal brotherhood, this profoundly changes young Zosima.
It plants a seed, a core principle that will take years to germinate and grow, but it will ultimately shape his entire life. It lays the absolute groundwork for the spiritual path he will eventually follow, the path of the elder who embraces the suffering and sins of the world.
It's not just a personal loss, it's a foundational event.
It's a foundational, transformative event in Zosima's spiritual formation. Absolutely.
Okay, so years pass after his brother's death, and Zosima grows up. As was common then, at age 16 to 18, he goes to a military campus for training, intending to join the army.
Right. The source notes that joining the army was a very common path, 150 or 200 years ago in Russia. There weren't the diverse career options available today, so military service was a well-established and expected route for young men seeking a profession.
And while he's training there, embracing this conventional path, a very human, very relatable drama unfolds that challenges him deeply. Zosima falls in love with a lady.
Ah, yes, the classic catalyst for youthful folly and intense emotion. Unfortunately for Zosima, this is unrequited love. She doesn't return his feelings.
Ouch.
And to compound his pain, she's already engaged to an army man, a fellow officer, making the situation even more difficult and triggering profound jealousy and frustration in young Zosima.
And unable to bear this intense jealousy and rejection, Zosima, in a moment of youthful passion, anger, and maybe adhering to that rigid sense of honor, He challenges her fiancé to a duel.
Yep, a duel, which were, as you mentioned, a complex social phenomenon, especially in the military class. The source points out, crucially, that they were actually illegal, even then seen by the state and the church as akin to murder.
Illegal, but still practice.
Right. Despite the illegality, people still engaged in them. Accepting a challenge was often seen as absolutely necessary to avoid dishonor, to maintain your reputation and standing, especially in a military environment.
So Zosima felt trapped by his emotions and the social pressure.
Seems like it. Caught between intense feelings and this powerful social code.
The duel is scheduled for the next day. What happens the night before this potentially fatal confrontation?
The night before is truly crucial. A period of intense internal turmoil for Zosima. He's consumed by this burning mix of anger, frustration, jealousy, anxiety.
Oh, real storm inside.
Absolutely. And this internal conflict boils over and manifests outwardly in a sudden, shocking act of violence against someone completely uninvolved. He lashes out violently at his servant.
His servant?
Yes. Hits him 2 punches, hard enough to cause the servant to bleed and fall.
Wow, just displaced anger.
Precisely. A raw, ugly expression of his internal state. And afterwards, when he's alone again, the immediate rage subsides, leaving him stunned and deeply puzzled by his own behavior. He sits there, maybe looking at his hands, wondering why he felt such intense anger, why he acted that way.
Trying to understand himself.
Yes. Seeking to understand himself, maybe clear his head before the duel, he goes outside, perhaps into nature. And suddenly, vividly, like a revelation, his elder brother's dying words come flooding back to him.
The words about universal responsibility?
Exactly. The profound and challenging idea of the responsibility we have for one another, and that even more sweeping concept that we are all, in some fundamental way, responsible for everything happening in the world, including each other's wrongdoings.
And that hits him hard after hitting his servant.
Hits him powerfully in that moment of introspection, shame, and remorse. He sees his violent act not just as a personal failure of temper, but as a violation of that principle of interconnectedness and universal care his brother spoke of.
And this realization leads to a profound, and for that time, quite astonishing act of humility.
It triggers a sudden and dramatic transformation in his mindset, moving from outward rage and pride, the dual challenge, to inward remorse and a deep understanding of his failure. He returns to his room, shuts the door, lies on his bed, covers his face with his hands, and begins to weep intensely, weeping for what he did to the servant, for his own failure.
Real deep remorse.
Yes. He then calls for the servant he hit. The servant, understandably terrified, is afraid, thinking he might be beaten again.
But Zosima's intention is completely different now.
Fundamentally, radically different. Zosima, still weeping, asks the servant for forgiveness, admitting he made a huge, terrible mistake. The servant is stunned into silence. Zosima then, in a gesture of complete abasement and profound humility, almost unheard of for an officer towards a servant, then prostrates himself fully on the ground before the servant, bowing down repeatedly, forehead touching the floor, asking for forgiveness.
That must have been utterly shocking for the servant to witness.
Imagine your master, an officer, bowing down to you, begging forgiveness with tears. The servant is astonished beyond words. And moved by the absolute sincerity of Zosima's remorse, the servant also begins to cry.
A powerful moment of connection.
It really is. Zosima embraces him, asks for forgiveness again, and the servant forgives him, acknowledging Zosima realized his mistake. After the servant leaves, Zosima feels an immense burden lifted from his chest. Palpable relief.
And his brother's words provide context for this specific relationship, too.
Yes, in that moment of clarity, he remembers more of his brother's words specifically about this dynamic. We should take care of our subordinates, who are only below us in a social system, a man-made hierarchy. In nature, his brother had taught everyone is equal. Being richer, having a higher rank, doesn't give you the right to mistreat others.
So inherent human dignity, regardless of social standing.
Exactly. This principle informs his actions not just with the servant, but crucially in the upcoming duel.
Okay, so he's had this powerful, transformative internal experience the night before the duel he initiated out of anger. How does the duel itself play out the next morning?
Well, the next morning, Zosima attends the duel, as scheduled, with his junior officer and second. His opponent, the fiancé, and his second are also there. They take their positions about 12 feet apart, pistols ready. The tension must have been incredible.
The moment of truth, according to the code of honor.
Exactly. He's expected to uphold his honor, aim, potentially kill, or be killed. But Zosima had had this fundamental, overnight change of heart. He makes a completely unexpected gesture. He gives his opponent the first shot.
Wow, that's incredibly risky in a duel.
Almost suicidal generosity, right?
Yeah.
Getting the first shot is a huge advantage. The shot is fired, the bullet passes close, grazes Zosima, but doesn't seriously injure him.
Lucky.
Very lucky. Now is Zosima's turn to shoot. The expectation is clear. He will aim and fire back. Instead, in a dramatic and public repudiation of the code, he looks his opponent directly in the eye and then deliberately throws his pistol away into the air.
Just throws it away.
Throws it away, renouncing the act of violence and the very premise of the duel, a completely unconventional, almost shocking move within that context.
Unprecedented.
Revolutionary, even, in a duel setting. He then speaks, breaking the silence. He apologizes to his opponent, saying he shouldn't have done this, initiated the duel out of pride and jealousy, and that he is truly sorry. He even says the opponent can shoot him again now if he wishes, basically turning the other cheek.
Incredible. And the opponent?
The opponent, utterly bewildered, having just fired and expecting to be fired upon, does not fire again.
But Zosima's own junior officer must have been furious.
Furious is an understatement. Outraged. He sees this not as principle, but as complete disgrace, a betrayal of military honor. He argues Zosima had the chance to win or kill his opponent, and instead chose this public display that seemed foolish, cowardly, or just mad. He felt Zosima had dishonored them all.
So later, there's a meeting to discuss this extraordinary incident.
Yes, a large meeting gathers, officers, notable figures. Many criticize Zosima's actions, fiercely foolish, unprecedented, a stain on honor. It simply wasn't done.
But not everyone.
Significantly, no. Some defend him. They argue it was the right thing to do, a higher form of courage than just following a barbaric code. They suggest Zosima's act led to a change of heart in the opponent, resolving the conflict without bloodshed. They argue against unnecessary violence, pointing out duels were becoming illegal anyway.
And Zosima speaks at this meeting to explain himself.
He does. And he uses the opportunity not just to explain his personal actions, but to preach, essentially, his brother's central theme, the desperate need for universal love and brotherhood. He identifies what he sees as a major problem afflicting the world, increasing isolation. People, he argues, are becoming more disconnected, losing that vital sense of love, community, brotherhood.
Connecting his personal experience to a broader societal problem, that's powerful.
It is. He argues society encourages us to live as separate individual units, responsible only for ourselves. But this, he states, isn't how the world fundamentally works, echoing his brother. True progress isn't just measured in external metrics, science, technology, numbers. True progress, he believes, is measured by the state of the human soul, which is suffering because of this isolation, jealousy, hatred. He believes the world can only function properly, avoid self-destruction, if people consciously strive to come together in universal love and brotherhood. Otherwise, he warns, we will destroy ourselves internally, even if outwardly progressing.
A profound message. How is it received?
Mixed reactions. Some agree, perhaps sensing the truth in his words. Others vehemently disagree, seeing his ideas as naive or radical. But Zosima seems largely unaffected by the praise or criticism. He did what he felt he had to do, based on his principles.
And following this public stand, he makes a significant decision about his future.
He announces his resignation from the military, states clearly his life's purpose is now fundamentally different. The path he's called to is not military service.
Right. And the other parties involved. The opponent, the lady.
They're both present. The lady thanks him, presumably for ending the conflict peacefully. The opponent, the man he almost dueled, hugs him, also expressing thanks. Their personal conflict is genuinely resolved.
Wow.
Zosima bids farewell and leaves the military campus. This marks the definitive end of his conventional military career and the clear beginning of a new spiritual path. He walks away from the expected, towards something else entirely.
So Zosima is now out of the military, maybe 23, 24, and kind of famous or infamous in town because of the duel incident?
Yes, his action was so public and unusual that word spread quickly. It made him a notable, maybe controversial figure. People were curious.
Did he embrace this attention?
Not really. The source mentions people did come to meet him, drawn by his reputation, but he tended to keep to himself. Suggests he wasn't seeking fame, likely still processing everything, seeking deeper understanding.
And then one day, while he's living this quiet, reflective life, a stranger comes to visit him.
This is the next crucial encounter. A mysterious man seeks Zosima out, specifically in his room. He's described as having a mysterious personality, hard to read, but also known to be very wealthy and famous for his great charity, a prominent philanthropist, outwardly a pillar of the community.
And older than Zosima.
Significantly older, yeah. around 55 or 60 compared to Zosima's mid-20s.
Why would a wealthy, respected older man seek out this young former officer known for a strange duel? What drew him?
This is key. He heard about the duel incident, but it wasn't the scandal. It was specifically Zosima's unconventional response, his act of principle against the code, his public remorse, his resignation. The stranger was drawn to Zosima's character, sensing something deeply different, authentic, compelling about him, an internal strength and moral clarity he felt he lacked.
He saw something in Zosima he needed.
Exactly. He recognized something that perhaps resonated with a hidden part of himself, a part longing for honesty and courage. He explicitly tells Zosima later that his action in the duel, his bravery in facing ridicule for doing right, gave him immense courage.
So they start meeting regularly, having these deep conversations.
Yes, for weeks, almost daily. Delving into profound subjects, meaning of life, God, good and evil, sin, suffering, fundamental topics.
That's an unusual dynamic. The older, successful man listening intently to the younger, unconventional one.
Highly unusual. And the dynamic is specific. The older man mostly listens to the younger Zosima, almost like a disciple seeking knowledge, absorbing what Zosima, maybe speaking from his recent intense experiences, has to say. And significantly, during all these weeks, the stranger rarely shares details about his own life. He's present, listening, but his own history remains veiled.
Holding something back until one day he decides to reveal it.
Yes, the weight of his secret becomes unbearable. Maybe Zosima's presence created an environment where confession felt possible. He decides it's time. He asks Zosima not to judge him. Revealing Zosima's courage gave him the strength. He then confesses a terrible secret that has tormented him for 14 years. A murder he committed long ago.
A murder, hidden for 14 years. What were the details?
It was fueled by possessive passion. He was intensely in love with a wealthy widow. She didn't return his affections and, devastatingly, planned to marry an army man, perhaps echoing Zosima's earlier jealousy.
So that possessive thought, if I can't have her, nobody can.
Exactly. He could bear the idea of her belonging to someone else. The crime itself was premeditated. He secretly entered her house late one night, around 1:30 or 2 a.m., climbed walls, entered through a roof room, took a dagger or knife, and stabbed her in the chest while she slept.
And he tried to cover it up.
Dreadfully so. To make it look like a robbery and deflect suspicion, he staged the scene, took jewels, valuable items from her wardrobe, making it appear like a thief broke in.
And this staging led to a wrongful accusation.
A truly tragic consequence. Circumstantial evidence unfortunately pointed towards the servant of the widow. The servant was found drunk outside in the rain that night, had blood on his hand, and a knife was found in his pocket.
Oh no, did the servant protest?
Vehemently. Pleaded innocence, said the blood was from a wound, he was just drunk. But despite his pleas, the circumstantial evidence was deemed sufficient by the judge. He was sentenced to prison.
And his fate?
Heartbreaking. The servant died from illness, possibly pneumonia from being out in the cold rain that night, before he could even be jailed. Died accused of a crime he didn't commit.
And the mysterious man lived with that. The murder and the innocent man's death?
This is the core of his 14 years of torment. For years, he tried to self-justify, especially regarding the servant's death. Told himself he wasn't directly responsible, it was illness caused by weather. A desperate attempt to distance himself, lessen the guilt.
But it didn't work. The guilt remained.
Immense, unbearable guilt. He describes this period as having died inside, constantly tortured. He tried various external methods to escape this torment, thinking if he just did enough good or was busy enough, the guilt would fade. None worked.
What kinds of things did he try?
The very thing he was famous for, charity. Became extremely charitable, gave away vast amounts of money, renowned as a great philanthropist, hoping that by doing immense outward good he could somehow atone, balance the scales. But while others saw him as good, the internal guilt remained, a constant corrosive weight.
So external good deeds couldn't fix the internal state. A crucial insight.
Absolutely. External actions couldn't touch the internal reality of the unconfessed crime. He also tried throwing himself into work, sometimes laboring 14, 16, even 20 hours a day, trying to absorb himself, exhaust himself. That also failed. The guilt was always there.
What about building a personal life? Marriage, family?
He even thought marrying and having children might solve it, that building a new life might fill the void or overshadow the past. But it didn't. Instead, it compounded his suffering. He felt like a complete fraud, constantly deceiving his wife and children who loved him, thought he was a good man, but didn't know his true nature. Felt it was fundamentally wrong to raise children while hiding such a crime. He tells Zosima he was tormented, living a life of internal hell, a kind of living death, for 14 years.
And he says Zosima's duel incident gave him the courage needed.
Yes, he emphasizes this. Learning about Zosima's public act of bravery, choosing the right thing against convention, declaring remorse despite ridicule, gave him immense courage. He saw in Zosima a rare moral courage, the courage to be vulnerable and honest. He felt Zosima could save him, show him a path out. And he told Zosima he was finally ready to do whatever Zosima suggested, a total surrender.
And what does Zosima, this young man who navigated his own guilt, counsel him to do?
Zosima's counsel is direct. Encourages the stranger to unburden himself completely by publicly confessing his crime. He asks him gently but firmly, how long can he live with this unbearable burden, this living death? Tells him he must relieve the weight on his soul. It's the only way to truly live again.
And the stranger agrees to this radical suggestion.
He agrees. Perhaps exhausted by the torment, inspired by Zosima's conviction, he says he will do it. He leaves Zosima's room that evening, around 10:30 or 11 p.m., presumably to prepare for this monumental, terrifying act.
But the source mentions a mysterious final visit that same night.
Yes, a very strange, poignant detail. He leaves, but then around 2 a.m., roughly the same time the murder occurred 14 years prior, he returns to Zosima's room, wakes Zosima, doesn't say anything, just sits opposite Zosima and stares intensely into his eyes for 2 or 3 minutes.
A silent communion.
Seems like it. A moment of silent, profound connection. Then, after this prolonged gaze, he gives a slight smile, which Zosima seems to understand, and leaves again without a word, maybe a final reckoning, acceptance, gratitude, readiness.
And the very next day, he goes through with it.
He does. The very next day is his birthday. He hosts a huge party, important townspeople, his family, the perfect public stage. In the middle of the party, he stands up, addresses the assembly, announces he has something important to tell everyone.
And then he confesses everything.
Everything. The murder 14 years ago, staging it as a robbery, the servant's wrongful accusation and death, acknowledging his full responsibility for that too, declares simply, starkly, I am a murderer.
How does the crowd react to this? His friends, family?
Utterly stunned. Silence, then disbelief. Their initial reaction, he's joking, lying, gone mad. This respected, charitable man, a murderer. Impossible.
But he provides evidence.
Yes, letters from the lady he loved, revealing motive perhaps, and crucially, the very jewels he stole that night to stage the robbery. Tangible evidence makes it impossible to dismiss. People remain disbelieving, but doubt is sown. Police are notified. They're puzzled too, truth or mental illness. His wife and children witness it all, utterly in shock. Their world collapses.
A complete public upheaval. What happens to him physically after this dramatic confession?
The physical toll seems immediate and severe. Within a day or two, he becomes gravely ill, seemingly dying. Face pale, drawn, doctors say he won't survive. His wife, devastated, confused, blames Zosima for his decline, believing the pressure caused his collapse, prevents Zosima from visiting for several days.
But eventually Zosima is allowed to see him one last time.
Yes. When the mysterious man briefly regains consciousness, sensing the end, his first request is to see Zosima. Despite the wife's resistance, Zosima is finally allowed in, sits quietly by the bed. The man, weak, reaches out his hand. Zosima takes it. They look into each other's eyes.
A final moment. What's exchanged?
The mysterious man speaks, weak voice, clear words. Thanks, Zosima. Says he never could have confessed without him, and then describes his internal state, the crucial shift. Says a huge burden has been lifted from his soul.
The weight is gone.
Exactly. For the first time in 14 years, he feels he can breathe, feels alive, no longer like a living corpse. Explicitly says Zosima liberated him from a life of hell.
And Zosima sees this.
Yes. Zosima sees the burden has lifted, that the man found peace, freedom, perhaps redemption, by confronting his guilt, accepting responsibility publicly. Zosima leaves, and the mysterious man dies a few days later, apparently free from the internal torment.
After his death and the scandal, public perception of Zosima is complex, mixed.
Yes. Initially, like the wife, some blame Zosima, feel he interfered, pushed the man, led to his death, see him as disruptive. However, over time, as shock subsides, others begin to see the deeper spiritual dimension that Zosima helped the man find peace, relieve an unbearable internal burden that was destroying him.
And this changes how people see Zosima himself.
Fundamentally, not just the eccentric young man from the duel, but someone with genuine spiritual depth, capacity for understanding suffering, guiding others towards healing. They see him as having a rare spiritual energy.
So people start seeking him out.
Yes, sensing this, people start bringing their own problems to him, seeking his counsel.
But Zosima doesn't immediately embrace this role.
No, he doesn't. Despite this growing reputation, Zosima, having witnessed such intense life, death, guilt, liberation, seems to want time to himself. He avoids the crowds, seeking solitude for reflection, integration, further inner development. He leaves the town where these events unfolded.
And this departure marks a significant transition, setting the stage for who he will become.
Absolutely. The narrative strongly suggests that from this point, in solitude and reflection, Zosima begins living a highly virtuous, ascetic, profoundly good life. This conscious decision to leave the world behind, pursue this new path, sets him firmly on the path to becoming the revered spiritual figure, the Elder Father Zosima.
So these foundational experiences, the brother's dying words, the duel, the mysterious man, are the crucible where his spiritual identity was forged.
Exactly. His compassion, his deep understanding of the human condition, it all comes from these intense lived experiences.
Okay, so what does all of this mean when we put these pieces together? We've traced incredible transformations here. The brother's deathbed awakening, Zosima's own pivotal moments, the mysterious man finding liberation through confession.
Right. The story really underscores the profound weight of unresolved guilt. It shows powerfully how external attempts to alleviate that internal suffering, charity, work, even family, ultimately fail if the core issue, the hidden truth, isn't addressed.
Peace only came through vulnerability and accepting responsibility.
Exactly. Made public. And it highlights that contrast between intellectual knowledge, knowing about something, and deep lived experience, understanding something in your head versus a realization that changes your whole being.
And woven throughout is that struggle between feeling isolated and recognizing our deep connection, our shared responsibility, that call for universal brotherhood.
It asks us to consider what true progress really means. Not just external achievements, but the internal state of the human soul. The fight against isolation, hatred, and embracing shared responsibility.
So here's a thought for you to carry with you. The mysterious man lived for 14 years, trying everything external to escape his guilt, but peace only came when he publicly accepted the truth of his internal state. What burdens might we carry? Maybe not murder, but still heavy regrets, mistakes, shames that might require an internal, maybe even vulnerable act of acceptance or confrontation, rather than just external distraction.
That's a powerful question.
Mm.
And what's the difference, as Zosima's life shows, between knowing intellectually we should be responsible for others and truly feeling that responsibility in a way that fundamentally changes our actions, our relationships, our place in the world?
Deep, searching questions this dive into Father Zosima's early life prompts us to ask ourselves.
Long after we finish reading, yeah.
Until next time, keep diving deep into the ideas that shape our understanding of ourselves and the world.